This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com. Before we begin today's program, I wanted to let listeners know we are rapidly approaching our 100th episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany, and to commemorate this very special moment, we're looking to hear from you, the listener, with your questions about the show, the people on it, and Planet Albany in general. So shoot us an email to david.lombardo@wcny.org, connect with us on social media, or record a message that we could play on the show by calling 518-650-1463. That number again is 518-650-1463.
I've also declared war on potholes. So here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in state government. And on today's episode, we're looking back on the 4 years of Kathy Hochul's tenure at the helm of New York State. What has she accomplished? What has been her unique mark? And what could the next 4 years look like? To make sense of the history and the future, we're joined by the co-author of New York Playbook, Politico New York reporter Nick Reisman. Thanks for making the time, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
So rewinding back to 4 years ago, there was a lot of conversation about what the new Hochul administration would look like in comparison to the Cuomo administration. And I think I'm on record as being very skeptical about the likelihood of major policy differences and just anticipating some rhetorical contrast. And now, looking back, I feel generally pretty vindicated. How do you think the last 4 years have been different because of Hochul calling the shots instead of Cuomo? And maybe where do you think it's been pretty similar?
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on is that politically, policy-wise, there has not been much difference between Kathy Hochul and Andrew Cuomo. That's fair to say. You know, like when you're governor of New York, there are certain political realities that you have to face. That, you know, you've got a deep blue city and then bellwether suburbs, and you have to win over both, right? So Kathy Hochul, in some respects, not every respect, but in many respects, has kind of continued a lot of the Cuomo policies. And if we were still under Andrew Cuomo in the year 2025, I think you would probably see a platform that is quite similar to the one that Kathy Hochul has rolled out. All of that said, you know, when it comes to the image that she projects, it is obviously quite different from Andrew Cuomo. Cuomo had this certain kind of masculinity about him. He would often tout the fact that he was the state government. He centralized a lot of power under the governor's office. And Kathy Hochul early on made a point of insisting that she was going to be different. She promised, like every gubernatorial administration that has come in since
where you're going with this.
The last 50 years, that it's going to be the most transparent administration in the history of state government. And like every gubernatorial administration since then, they have fallen short on that count. But at the same time, she has tried to project this image of someone who is cheerful, not bullying, someone who doesn't condone bad behavior within her office. And that has been different from the Andrew Cuomo experience. Andrew Cuomo, at the height of his power, really was both the climate and the weather in Albany. And Kathy Hochul has taken a step back from that and said that things can work differently here.
Do you feel like, sticking with what you just described about Governor Cuomo, is that this governor has been more reactive than Governor Cuomo? Governor Cuomo was maybe more successful at setting the agenda?
Andrew Cuomo tried to shape events to his liking, and that sometimes worked out in his favor, sometimes it didn't. And Kathy Hochul, yes, can be a bit more reactive, a little less agenda setting at times. And I think that has perhaps been to their detriment from time to time, that they haven't been able to kind of seize control of events. But that also goes back to the fact that Kathy Hochul is outwardly less of a micromanager than Andrew Cuomo was.
And thinking about this memo that the administration put out where they tout 4 years of accomplishments, right from the very top where they mention middle-class tax cuts to the end where they're talking about, say, abortion protections, a lot of it seemed like things that the Cuomo administration had focused on in the past and likely would have focused on in the future. So is there anything in particular that stands out to you as being a unique Kathy Hochul accomplishment? Because the things that stand out to me might be the child tax credit investments this past year, the focus on mental health, and I mean this idea of smartphone restrictions, which seems to be one of the few issues where she often talks about being the first mom governor, where I actually think we see a real ramification of her being a parent. Because while Cuomo is the parent to 3 kids, I don't necessarily think of him as someone whose policy priorities were shaped by that experience.
Yeah, I think the cell phone ban in schools is probably the most wide-reaching signature accomplishment for Kathy Hochul so far, and it's the one that promises to potentially have the biggest impact in the future. I mean, there was the housing compact, certainly, and that remains to be seen how successful that is going to be.
Definitely around the margins compared to what she initially proposed.
Yes, I think that's accurate. But the cell phone ban does go to almost this post-COVID concern about mental health and making sure that we're kind of not so tethered to our cell phones, and the concern that children's mental health has been affected over the last couple of years, and this is a way to kind of dial back that constant need to be in the digital universe. It's unusual to see a governor step in on an education issue like this, just because there is so much local control for school districts in New York to begin with, number one. Number two, the governor does not control the state education department.
Much to their regret.
Much to their regret, and that goes back to every governor since they created that arrangement with SED. This is really interesting, and it's one that obviously tests well with voters. It tests well with parents. I know there's some pushback about the need for kids to have some sort of contact with their parents if there's an emergency or what have you. But in the main, this is something that could have a very far-reaching effect, and really is, when you think about like signature accomplishments, things that affect people outside of the walls of this Capitol building, I think that's the one that people will still be talking about 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, and going hand in hand with that is probably the restrictions on minors accessing sort of algorithm-based social media, which was a part of the 2024 legislative agenda. But you mentioned the housing language and thinking about education more broadly. Those are two areas where I think of the governor running into kind of a buzzsaw with the legislature. She had this effort as part of the budget to require basically the development of housing in certain areas, and this real stick approach, and that was shot down by the legislature. She also came at them with this idea that we're not going to just dramatically increase school funding, and they said thanks but no thanks, and she quickly learned from that. And I'm curious what you see as her relationship with the legislature, and do you feel like it has evolved in any significant way over the last 4 years? Because my main takeaway is that she sees the budget as being her main cudgel against the legislature, and if she wants to get things done in the budget, hold your breath, and eventually you'll get it done.
Yeah, and she figured that out with the budget, and that's why we're getting budgets that aren't passing by March 31st or March 30th, which was an Andrew Cuomo preoccupation.
Timely budgets.
Right, yeah, sometimes it would pass April 4th, and they'd still call it on time, which was not true. But Kathy Hochul is recognizing that most voters in New York are not sitting up in the middle of the night on April 12th and thinking to themselves, where is the state budget? Why hasn't it passed yet? And she knows that she can wear the legislature down. And it's a smart strategy because the longer that the budget is not passed, the more leverage the governor gets with each passing day. And she has been able to effectively wield that power to get what she wants, like changes to the bail law, changes to discovery law. I expect she's probably going to have to do that again next year because the budget next year is going to be a real nightmare, most likely, with all the federal aid cuts and spending reductions. But the first big miscalculation that she made with the legislature was the Hector LaSalle debacle. I've been covering this place now for 15 years, and I have never seen a governor so badly bungle something like the Hector LaSalle nomination. And I covered David Patterson, with all due respect to Governor Patterson, who had a hapless tenure. But that episode really got things off on the wrong foot. It was apparent that Hector LaSalle was not going to be the guy that Democrats in the state Senate wanted. It was bizarre walking up to members of the legislature, Democratic members of the state Senate, and asking them about the governor's pick for the Court of Appeals chief judge, which, it should be noted, in the past had been so pro forma that it was like barely covered, which honestly was an oversight on the LCA's part. But
the Senate didn't really take it too seriously either.
They were. It was a rubber stamp.
Yes,
it was a rubber stamp for a very long time, and that was the case under Republicans. It was largely the case under Democrats, and all of a sudden, Hector LaSalle became an issue. And you can argue back and forth about the fairness of the points that Democrats and actually kind of like lefty Democrats were raising about
labor
Hector LaSalle,
unions,
labor unions,
justice movement.
Right. But at the end of the day, it was apparent that this nomination was in trouble.
Right.
And instead of saying, okay, what do I need to do to make you happy, she doubled down on it. And the other concurrent thing that was going on around that time was the legislature came back to vote itself a pay raise. Now, every time the legislature votes itself a pay raise, the governor has to also sign that bill. And instead of getting something from the legislature to show that, yes, they do indeed deserve this pay raise, and this isn't just an Andrew Cuomo thing. George Pataki did this too. George Pataki got stuff from the legislature in exchange for a pay raise. Kathy Hochul just let it go right through. And she had said, well, we're doing things differently here. That is not how government works, though. It's not how politics works. And I think that was part of the learning curve for the governor, was the legislature, after kind of being under the thumb, quite frankly, of Andrew Cuomo for years. The Democrats had their supermajority, and they were going to flex it. They were going to use it. And the governor learned that the hard way by getting dealt those setbacks. And since then, I think the dynamic has kind of equalized a little bit, and the way she has been able to get what she wants in the budget is a reflection that she does understand that power dynamic, which is kind of a brute force power dynamic at the end of the day, but she does get it.
Well, I'm glad you bring up that initial experience and the way she approached some of the issues at the Capitol in early 2021 and 2022, because I wonder whether it was also informed by the people she surrounded herself with, which, to my memory, was not necessarily veterans of Planet Albany. There were people from the New York City political scene. There were
a lot of de Blasio administration folks.
People from corporate
We're still there.
world.
We're still smart, by the way. They know what they're doing.
They do, but I think that there is a way that Albany works that, like you said, is maybe consistent over the years and can be different. Yeah. So does anything stand out to you about the people that she surrounded herself with?
Yeah, I mean, just to that point, this is such a weird, cloistered place at the end of the day with time-bound traditions. And George Pataki took a lot of stuff that Mario Cuomo did, not in terms of like policy or politics, but just the way of doing things, and he kind of replicated that. Andrew Cuomo replicated a lot of the George Pataki stuff. Anytime you try to, quote unquote, do things differently here, and it's a new day in Albany, you run the risk of becoming Elliot Spitzer. And Elliot, as we all know, at the end, when scandal came knocking for him, he had no friends left. No, I think the staff that Kathy Hochul has around her is not the issue necessarily when it came to the relationship issues that she had early on with the legislature. I think the issue was probably the governor herself, and probably needed to be dealt those setbacks to understand ultimately just how this place is functioning and what was going on here and what those power dynamics were. I don't think it was necessarily a staff issue, but just an acknowledgement that the governor needed to probably have those failures and then realize, okay, here's the right way of doing things.
For more than 100 years, the New York State Association of Counties has served as the united voice of New York's county leaders, fostering excellence in county government and advocating for sustainable funding and sensible legislation that protects local taxpayers and the essential services they rely on. Learn more at nysac.org. What about her actual leadership approach behind the scenes? Because you described Andrew Cuomo, and this is not news to most people, as a micromanager. What we've heard, at least from some people, is that Kathy Hochul will delegate some things to Catherine Garcia, Director of State Operations. Mm-hmm. The council at the time was fine, might have had her purview, as limited as or maximalist as it might have been, and then the governor is interested in some stuff. What do you know about her approach behind the scenes and where she chooses to step in and how she chooses to direct her team?
I think one area of interest to me was just this past summer, when you had kind of a mini scandal erupt in her office with Avi Small, who was her press secretary at the time, someone who Kathy Hochul was clearly quite close to.
Yes.
And Kathy Hochul, I believe the governor actually officiated Avi's wedding. So clearly there was a closeness there, and Avi was a very, very loyal enforcer and aggressive press person, and he had a scandal where he was accused of forcibly touching somebody during a after-hours party involving the governor's staff. Still technically a work site when it comes to something like that if you've got colleagues there. And Kathy Hochul, once this became public, basically said this is not tenable anymore, and Avi Small resigned. So that, to me, was kind of an interesting episode where it became clear that you had a staffer who had a real scandal, something that she had come in and said, if I hear about anybody who is mistreating people, they've got to go. Now, there had been a history of problems involving Avi Small, apparently, according to some folks who had raised concerns in the past, and apparently she hadn't done much on that. So, there are some potential blind spots there that she's going to have to look out for, I think, ultimately with staff. I do think that she is a demanding boss. She has her... from what I have heard, she has her way of doing things to a certain degree. The binder must always be out there with all of her briefing notes. We know that when the binder is put in place on the podium, the governor is about to take the stage. So, like any boss in a high-profile situation like this, she has her way of doing things in an office that is very specific to her and very tailored to her.
Well, one of the ways that we in the media really see how an administration operates is how their press shop runs. And one of the things that I thought was really a hallmark of the Cuomo administration, aside from the yelling, was the fact that they had...
Aside from the yelling,
yes,
right.
was that they had a presence here in Albany that was constantly looking to influence the umpires, so to speak, that they wanted us to be thinking about them as we were calling balls and strikes, and that has not been the case with the Hochul
It's a little less overbearing, yes.
Yeah, and I'm curious whether you think that is a detriment to their media approach, because for something like the smartphone restrictions or some of the other policies that the governor has pushed, which are ultimately popular, she hasn't necessarily gotten any sort of commensurate bounce, and I wonder whether that is a problem with not necessarily securing the best media coverage.
I don't know if it's necessarily a reflection of her media coverage per se. It might just be the fact that the media is perhaps not as influential as it once was. You know, I heard this story once about Cuomo that he really argued vociferously for something to be above the fold on A1 of a print newspaper. And I mean, come on! Like, does that matter in the 21st century?
Not for a couple years
and
now.
I love print newspapers. Don't get me wrong, but he had a very kind of almost old-fashioned sense of the media. He still does, for that matter. And Kathy Hochul, she has middling poll numbers. Like, there's no way around it. I mean, like, yes, some of her unfave is like going back up and back down again. But she has struggled with her popularity in New York, and I don't have a real diagnosis for that. Incumbents in general are not really well liked. She is not the most dynamic public official in New York State. She doesn't seem to inspire a lot of love, but I don't think that is because her media coverage has been good or bad.
Okay.
I think it is just kind of a function of the waning influence in part of the media. Like it used to be that if you got like a great editorial in the Buffalo News or the Times Union or even the New York Times for that matter, it would give you a nice little bump. And nowadays that matters less and less.
Moving forward, any sense of what the next 4 years could look like? Because I remember covering Andrew Cuomo's third term, and there was this axiom that you spend your first term, responding to the last guy. The second term, you're setting your own path, and it's that third term that you got to kind of look out for. And to me, 2021, 2022 is kind of her first term. We've basically seen the second term, and to me, this next 4 years, 2026 on, it seems to be her third term.
Well, she was playing out the string on the Cuomo administration of 21-22. So this is her, technically, I can't do math, but this is her second full term that she'd be running for. I mean, more immediately, look, like, I think, first of all, she's got to deal with these federal budget cuts, which have the chance, most likely, of reshaping how New York budgets over the next decade. I mean,
do you think this sets her up to be like David Patterson circa 2009, 2010, where he took the lead, tried to make tough cuts, and people were like, "You suck, man." Hats off to you on trying to be a leader, but you tried to cut my program. You're dead to me.
And Patterson was dealt like a really, really bad hand with the recession. This is not a recession, though.
No.
This is like
Not yet.
This is different. Not yet. Right. Knock on wood. This is not a recession, though. This is very, very different. This is very much like a political impact of what's going on in Washington right now. In many respects, it's more complicated than a recession because not only does she have to deal with the federal budget cuts, but she also has to deal with the politics of Trump 2.0. She has this surprisingly, I don't know if it's fair to say, a good relationship with President Trump, but it hasn't been acrimonious.
They find ways to work together.
She speaks with him, and she has seemingly so far convinced him to not completely torpedo the congestion pricing toll program in Manhattan, which seems like a feat to my mind. And she has been able to negotiate with him on wind energy, on nuclear energy, on this pipeline situation. So she has been, at least I am surprised by this, adept at talking with Trump, which is not easy to do. Perhaps Trump doesn't see her as a threat the same way he sees like Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker as threats, but she does have, there is an open line of communication there. I don't know how much longer that is going to last, especially going into 2026, especially if you have either Elise Stefanik, who is a MAGA convert running for governor, or Bruce Blakeman, who is a pal of Trump's running for governor. So that whole dynamic may shift in the next 12 months or so. And then even beyond that, if she wins re-election, what is the last 2 years of Trump's term going to look like? Will Dems have control of the House? Does that mean Trump's impeachment? Will Republicans retain control of the House? And will that mean the president will be unbridled in what he tries to accomplish over the remaining 2 years of his term? And then in 2028, which will come in the middle of the next governor's term, will be another presidential election. So there are so many variables there about what the next 4 years could bring Kathy Hochul. It's kind of mind-boggling to think about.
What about the political side of things? I think about the fact that when Governor Hochul spoke at the Democratic National Convention, she was not warmly received, but now she's been sort of leaning into this fight over redistricting, and I think is sort of red meat for the base. So where do you see her standing among Democrats in 2026 when she, will probably have a primary challenge, assuming her lieutenant governor, which we did not even get to, is successful in getting on the ballot? And do you see her becoming more popular and a national leader, like she's tried to assume the mantle of with her national TV appearances?
So much of this is going to be kind of predicated on how successful Dems are in some of these House races in New York. Look, she was really, really out there on redistricting. She, after Texas moved to redraw their maps, and then they drew these 5 new kind of Trump-friendly House seats, and then California responded in turn with their own 5 kind of Democratic-friendly House seats. New York obviously can't do it, at least until 2028 if a constitutional amendment passes. I think one thing kind of running through the backs of a lot of Democrats' minds right now is how strong Kathy Hochul's coattails are going to be heading into 2026. Will she be able to, at the very least, not do any harm to Laura Gillen, Tom Suozzi, Josh Riley, John Mannion? George Latimer is kind of not necessarily a special case because that seat is pretty safe in a general.
Pat Ryan,
for that matter too. Yes,
whatever candidate emerges from the clown car of Democrats looking to take on Mike Lawler.
Right. So will Democrats are doing in New York more defense than they are offense. Let's be frank, whatever D-Trip is going to be trying to sell people, like Mike Lawler is really the only seat that they have like an actual shot at flipping. And honestly, like Lawler's raised a lot of money and he's pretty adept at holding that swing seat. I think a wild card could be if Elise Stefanik is running for governor, and there's a Republican trying to keep that North Country House seat red.
But we're betting Republicans hold that seat.
Yes, I have a hard time seeing a Democrat win it. But look, I mean, we're in crazy times right now. Anything can happen, and there seems to be a lot of energy, at the very least, among Trump critics up in the Adirondacks. But I think it's still a reach. So at the end of the day, the only seat that the Dems at the moment seem to have a realistic shot at flipping is Lawler's seat, and that's going to be a heavy lift. So you gotta at the minimum hold, if you're the Democrats, you gotta at the minimum hold. What do we say here? Gillen, Suozzi, Riley, Ryan, Mannion, 5. Right? That's not easy. And yes, it's going to be a midterm under a Republican president, but I feel like the rule book has been kind of thrown out here. We don't know what sort of effect, say, the new mayor of New York City, which very well could be a Democratic socialist, Zohran Mamdani, will have on some of these suburban House seats, how effectively Republicans will be leveraging Mamdani in some of these races, especially on Long Island. What if Bruce Blakeman is the nominee? That means a lot of Republicans are going to be turning out in Nassau County. So that's a problem if you're Laura Gillen or Tom Suozzi. or whoever is running against Andrew Garbarino, for instance.
But let's not spend too much ink.
But I
Garbarino's
don't think we have to worry about that either. So, look, it's going to be tricky. It is not a layup for Democrats in New York next year by any stretch of the imagination. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure on Kathy Hochul, fairly or unfairly, that her campaign does not do any harm to those running in those down ballot House races. As we know, Nancy Pelosi blamed Kathy Hochul for running a poor campaign back in 2022, and virtually everything that Kathy Hochul has done politically since then has been in response to that.
Well, we've been speaking with Nick Reisman. He is a reporter with Politico New York and co-author of the wildly influential New York Playbook. Thank you so much for making the time, Nick.
Of course.
And before we go, I wanted to let listeners know that we are rapidly approaching our 100th episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany, and in light of this monumental occasion, we wanted to hear from you, the listener, with any questions you might have about the show or Planet Albany in general, and we'll try to answer those questions with some of our most popular guests on that 100th episode. So shoot us an email, leave us a note on social media, or record a message at 518-650-1463, and if it's relevant, we'll play it on the air. So again, we want to hear from you, whether that's shooting an email to david.lombardo@wcny.org, connecting to us on social media, or recording a message for 518-650-1463. Until next time, podcast adjourned. Well, one of the ways... Did you want some seltzer? Go for the seltzer.